Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from Netsparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/Netsparker. Cybercriminals are using social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on victims, your employees, or your customers. Protect your Office 365 email from today's most sophisticated attacks with Barracuda Email Threat Scanner. It's a free tool to help protect your business from these hard-to-detect attacks. The Barracuda Email Threat Scanner uses artificial intelligence to hunt and eliminate Office 365 email threats. Find the cybersecurity threats hiding in your Office 365 email right now. Get your free email threat scan at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. We're more than happy to announce that we'll be at Infosec World in 2021 in person, October 25th through the 27th. This year, our annual partnership with Infosec World is extra special as we're both part of the same company, the Cyber Risk Alliance. What does that mean for Security Weekly listeners and Infosec World attendees? Well, you get to see and hear from many of the Security Weekly team at the event, and you save 20% off your World Pass. Please visit securityweekly.com/ISW2021 to register with our discount code. This segment is sponsored by Cycognito. Joining us from Cycognito is Rob Gurzeev, CEO and co-founder. Rob has led the development of offensive security solutions for both the private sector and intelligence agencies. Prior to founding Cycognito, he was the CTO of the product department of the 8200 Israeli Intelligence Corps. Today, he joins us to discuss protecting the attack surface. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Nice to have you on, Rob. And I'm very excited, actually. I don't know if you knew that Adrian Scenario was also here with us. And Adrian and I collaborated. Mostly Adrian did the product reviews, where we tested your product as well as many, many others, and really liked your product a lot. So securityweekly.com/reviews, right? It's where you can find that first lab test that we did.
Yeah, these reviews were actually really good. I think it was maybe the first time that I at least saw a review of like 8-10 pages with both technical assessment and some business aspects and value prop aspects of the solution. So that was awesome to have, and glad that you got the results you got and the bottom line you got, which was really helpful with a bunch of conversations we had.
And I think, we all, yourself included, Rob, asked the same question when we talk about attack surface management. We're like, why haven't we solved this problem sooner? And I'm always like, why isn't everyone doing this? I don't understand. Yeah. This is an awesome thing. We should do this, right?
Yeah, no, it's funny, I actually had, and this is a funny story. So when I talked to Dima, my co-founder and CTO today, about this about 4 years ago, and I told him, look, companies don't know their attack surface. Attackers are seeing and are targeting these weak spots, but the security teams have no idea. They have to deploy all of these security solutions, but then it's problematic. It's a huge problem that the security team and attackers are seeing different things. And he asked me the same question. He asked me, how come it's not solved? In fact, he said, I don't believe you. Of course, he was joking, but he said, I don't believe it. There's no way it hasn't been solved yet, because we're having this problem for 20 plus years. Now, interestingly, it has become exponentially more painful, I believe, in the industry's defense, call it. It has become exponentially more painful over the last 10 years as companies move to the cloud. Networks have become increasingly more complex, the tech stack of companies became more complex, and companies now have between thousands and millions of assets exposed to the internet. And that became a huge problem that, interestingly enough, cannot be solved with legacy technologies that most vendors are still using today.
Yeah, I think that's evidenced by when in the pen testers in the virtual room, right, will most likely attest to this, that when you start a penetration test, oftentimes before you have the first meeting with the client, you can tell them about stuff in their attack surface that they didn't know about. And that always blew me away. I'm like, why aren't we solving this problem?
Right, absolutely. And what was really odd to us as engineers coming from intelligence agencies is, if you have a target like ISIS, right, or Al-Qaeda or Boko Haram, you can't ask them to deploy these agents or virtual machines in their networks. Or maybe you can ask them, but they will probably not comply. And they will definitely not tell you about their org structure, affiliates, IP ranges, and what have you. But every vendor out there today is asking the customer, the security team, for deploying technologies or for all of this input. And we believe that actually creates many blind spots that then get companies compromised. And that was our main mission, to solve this gap between what attackers are seeing and what the vendors or security solutions are seeing. And the specific reason I personally believe it hasn't been solved yet is because the industry is progressing in a really incremental way. You have Nmap built in the 90s, right? We all know Nmap, and in a sense, love Nmap, right? It was built in the 90s, and when you had a few servers connected to the internet and much smaller networks, it was fine. But 99% of the technologies out there, you can really see like the evolution from Nmap to visualized Nmap results with some CVE information that is based on Nmap type of data, and you simply cannot solve certain problems with that kind of incremental evolution.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like back in the day, the reason we didn't scan from the outside in is because we didn't have a cloud, and it was actually costly to stand something up. Now the problem today is that we have the clouds. We have cloud infrastructure, so we can stand something on the outside, but we can stand up a whole bunch of stuff that increases our attack surface.
Right. No, I think that's a great point. I mean, building technology like ours 10 years ago would have cost literally tens of millions of dollars just to run. So that's absolutely true. And also technologies like graph data models, right? They were not scalable at all, or were much more difficult to scale 10 years ago. When you look at companies like Palantir and others that were some of the first ones to try and implement this kind of data models and databases to solve more complex problems. That's an interesting evolution as an industry. And in that sense, by the way, the cybersecurity industry is actually 10 years behind the rest of the industry, or many tech areas like Google and AWS, ad companies, marketing companies, which have to deal with much bigger scale, and where the buyer is also asking certain quantifiable questions, where you can't just tell the customer, hey, we'll scan 1% or 30% of your network and it will be fine. It wouldn't fly in any other industry, but it does in cybersecurity. And we actually have a problem with that as people. And we strongly believe that the industry should change that. And it seems like more and more CISOs and others, CIOs, get that and want to drive that change.
So are we in a different place than we were, say, 10 or 20 years ago? It seems like we are in a complexity conundrum where we have more data, we have more endpoints, we have more visibility needs, we have big data and AI, but we've also added so many layers of complexity and scalability in order to facilitate all of these other IT and business units as we move forward. From a security standpoint, it seems like we are behind the curve at least 10 years, and we haven't adopted or gotten much past what Nmap is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the reasons for that is that unlike, say, sales tools, marketing tools, and others, where things are not static, but are not changing that fast. In cybersecurity, there are new IoT devices, new cloud solutions every month and you need to protect more types of data, more and more complex and different network architectures. And so much effort is invested in just making the deployments easier in these new environments so that very little or small amounts of R&D is actually going towards leveraging modern machine learning capabilities, NLP capabilities to solve some of these problems. For example, some of the first investments we made at Cycognito were things like leveraging assets, content and context to understand what they are. So when you look at these millions of assets, you can't look at millions of IP addresses or open ports, right, and figure out what this is. But by leveraging certain keywords and other elements, visual elements within web interfaces and other things, you can actually figure out that this is a payment mechanism because of these and these keywords and these MasterCard and Visa visual elements and these network links to these other companies' assets and to the Visa website. And you can also understand by running active tests against that machine that there is an SQL injection vulnerability, exposing the customer's financial information, right? So if you go to the bottom line insight, the CEO of this company wants to know that their customers' financial data is exposed. That's a critical business insight, something you must know. But no combination of network port scanners, CVE scanners, and the like can solve this problem. You have to leverage technologies like NLP and machine learning to automatically at scale finding these kind of third-party components even, and your subsidiaries' assets, and the millions of assets you've got all across the world, and then understand what they are, say payment mechanisms, production, critical databases, and others, and then also contextualize the risk. For example, you have customers' data exposed here, or these dozens of credentials of your own and others' databases on this AWS directory. So from how do I operationalize it perspective, there is a night and day difference. And that's what I'm talking about when I say you can solve these problems by incrementally improving Nmap, like adding a big map or some information about the IP range, or guess what CVEs might be there based on the software's version. That simply doesn't get you there. And the bigger and more complex the attack surface is, the clearer it is to security teams that it doesn't scale. And as they're getting attacked more and more, and many companies are also getting breached, they start to care more about that business problem.
Does that take into context things like SaaS applications and disparate data where the company is leveraging multiple platforms in order to manage the scalability? It seems like we've got to make light year jumps and keep up with technology, but we keep ending up in a circular, redundant thing where we bring all of our stuff into our internal network, protect that, then we take it out to a virtual environment, then we're back to a thin client and some VDI, and now we're out to like SaaS applications and making that disperse. Does this scale along with that and provide context around what is core central and centric to business importance and business fundamentals out in the SaaS applications as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also a great point. For example, we've helped many Fortune 500 companies learn about knowledge management systems and many others, SaaS applications that the security team didn't even know they have. And using our automated pen testing capabilities, we have found, for example, Okta solutions that were misconfigured because of various reasons that exposed or led to the exposure of API keys and sensitive information. So again, that's another great example of something that an Nmap or a vulnerability scanner simply cannot do. It's not their mission. They were not built to do it. And there's no incremental improvement that can happen to let them do it. And on the other hand, to your point, if I'm a CEO or a CIO or a CISO, I don't care. I just need to know about that risk.
And Rob, I think it's also interesting how you discover some of this information, because I think there's a lot of theories and even some practice where I could implement one of these techniques. And what you've done inside the product, I think one of the reasons it impresses me, if you kind of blended these together and taken, lack of a better term, best of breed. One of those things that we did an RSA interview actually just over a year ago, and it stuck with me when you talked about how you look on the web for images, right? We all know we can use something like TinEye and find usages of images, and you were like, yeah, that's like training wheels, Paul. like what you guys are. Can you explain a little bit how you do the image analysis to discover some of this other infrastructure like SaaS services?
Yeah, sure thing. So if you take examples like these payment mechanism, which is the easiest example probably. So you have certain files like the logo of MasterCard or Visa, or if you think about a Cisco gateway, which is another very common example. Let's take the Cisco gateway. So you'll have this IT company here or this partner of your customer, this company, this target company. And that Cisco ASA, for example, can be vulnerable and exploitable. Now, if you're a hacker, right, you'll be able to see that you have in the title something like connect to network X of that other company. You'll have various elements in the web interfaces HTML that will tell you what product this is, and also some other elements. And you'll be able to see in some cases the other company's logo. And you'll even see elements like this drop-down list that includes some of the other companies' networks names, like production environment X or partners platform Y. So if you're a hacker and you're in front of that web interface, it's clear to you that this gateway connects this company with these other companies' networks or even specific solutions and data. And if it's exploitable, that's a path of least resistance into the other company's stuff. So you're in a great position. But if we go back again to the Nmap and vulnerability scanners and the alike conversations, there is no way they can do it, and there is no incremental improvement that can get you there. So when you're building a platform that is based on a graph data model that represents the organization, not just the network, but the organization, and you can represent in that graph data model also complex connections that say, for example, this company acquired this other company 2 years ago. Here is the evidence, and this subsidiary is using this cloud asset over here. And this is vulnerable in this way and is exposing this kind of data. So if you have that graph data model, and if you marry, and we strongly believe that companies should do that, if you marry attack surface management with automatic security testing, which is the only way to protect an attack surface, you can start with your UI. And when you talk to this customer, you can start with the bottom line insights about that data exposure or that attack vector that starts from this gateway and ends in your development environment of this product or this department, which is really what you want to know from a business perspective, versus the legacy approach that some companies that were established in the 90s are still using, which is you tell us what IP ranges you want to scan. We will look at the software versions and we'll tell you about thousands of critical issues you have or might have based on these software versions.
Now,
And
is that utilizing like AI and the ML, like pathing and relationships? You said you guys are using like graph databases. Now, each of those is going to have a very complex node and endpoint relational things that may be disparate data, but leveraging that with something like AI and providing the pathing, is that how you guys are managing those complex relationship values and then figuring out those multiple paths or multiple avenues to the disparate datas?
exactly, that's actually quite complex, but you got it right. So we use Bayesian algorithms that, for example, look at these dozens of databases, Google search results, many companies' websites, and they create these 1,000 hypotheses by hypothesis about this company acquiring this other company that has this kind of an asset. And there is a score of likelihood to any such assumption based on the amount and type and reliability of the sources for this machine learning engine. And that's how you calculate and build out this graph of organizations and assets, and based on the security testing element, also risk, where you have a confidence score for everything, and you can see like the cause root analysis for everything you're seeing. So you're not just told, hey, you have these random, thousands of critical vulnerabilities and these IP addresses, go figure it out. But you can see the map and the quote unquote machine's thought process behind the conclusion or the insight.
So you're able to make a business decision, business risk, based off of multiple layers of scores and confidence that then calculate into those path and relation. That's freaking phenomenal.
And the beauty in Bayesian algorithms is, they're not random in the sense that the machine gives you this conclusion, but then you can't understand why it reached that conclusion, which is the major challenge with most machine learning algorithms and AI capabilities. And the other huge advantage is it actually learns from the user. So over time, it becomes better based on the user's input.
Joff, comments, questions? I know a lot of this is in your wheelhouse.
Oh, yes. I just managed to unmute myself. So one of the key things is what you just said at the end there. The fact that you're learning and refining the models based on the user input is incredibly important. I mean, that's honestly how Google has their success, right? I mean, to keep feeding the machine and keep refining the models is everything. So I don't have any specific questions. I'm really, I think Tyler's like covered everything pretty much.
I think that's a great comment, by the way. And I'll add one more random anecdote. So Dina, my co-founder, was a co-founder and also an architect in a bunch of companies for 20 years. And there is tremendous importance in that experience, because if you don't have that mission in mind from day one, you will not build the relevant data models, infrastructure, and development tools in the first 2 or 3 years in the company that will allow you to get there. You'll be stuck with the Nmap data model where you have IP ranges, open ports, CVEs, and that's it. So all of the innovation you can do in that case, starting from year 3, is making the UI nicer, adding more graphs, building integrations. But that's it, even in year 8 or 10.
Executive summaries.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really. No, you're absolutely you're dead on, because it's not really adding anything other than pretty stuff to the product, and that only takes you so far. But to have that vision ahead of time, this is where I really want this thing to go, and build that foundation. That's everything.
Yeah, and I can also share as a founder, when you start a company, your investors, and we have great investors from Lightspeed and Accel. So they get it, but most investors don't understand why you need to invest these tens of millions of dollars in R&D, and you see certain investments fruits just in year 2 or 3 or 4. For example, in this area, there is no way to bring significant results within less than 2 years of building these algorithms and working closely with customers on getting them right and get to the right precision balance. So building the team right, having the right investors and partners as a part of this process, and know that this is your mission from day one was also key for us, and I think for any company that wants to solve such problems.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really interesting comment, actually, because it's a trap that a lot of people unfortunately fall into, and I think it's a product of the venture capital industry, that they push you for results so quickly that if you've got a much longer term strategic kind of plan, that's not going to fit, right? It's not going to be something that those venture capitalist folks are going to necessarily tolerate. So it's really important, just like you said, to find the right investors that are looking at that long-term horizon.
Sorry, hold on.
I have a question around
hold on, Tyler. Yeah, Adrian, did you have a question?
Well, Tyler can go ahead if he I was going to kind of take it back in more of a technical direction and share some of my insights, but you can go ahead, Tyler.
Right.
I can.
Tyler, then Adrian.
After that.
Adrian, you're not fitting in on the show, buddy. You got to just hop in there and take it over. That's how it works.
I'm just being polite.
Yeah, that's your problem.
Trying to.
Well, there's your problem right there.
The data modeling and improvement and telemetry as this moves forward. Have you guys figured out, and are you acquiring a lot of the telemetry from customers? Obviously, hopefully that's sanitized and or anonymized, but those data models are continuously being rebuilt upon based on the current threat landscape as that telemetry is being fed back into the system. That's right?
Yeah, so that's actually a great point. I can share that we have recently built various integrations to take some of the internal network context and knowledge to amplify what our engines are able to find and add more context to it. And also, if you're these attack surface protection analyst, de facto probably a SOC team member, vulnerability management team member, or a threat hunter, and you need to, or you're trying to map your company's attack surface, you need to leverage today literally dozens of DNS and IOC and so many other databases and data sources, and write your own scripts to make some sense out of all of it. And we built our data model from day one so that we can, and we are, leveraging such sources so that the platform gives you the insights about the assets, about the risk, about the security grading, that also helps you focus, by the way, on the 10 security gaps that generate 90% of the risk versus thousands of alleged critical issues. But we believe that there's importance in leveraging such data points to give the customer, the security team, these insights and conclusions versus data dumping random things on the security team, which I think was the general approach for many years. And many VCs finance, literally thousands of companies creating all sorts of data. But I think that as an industry, we're now getting to the point where consolidation starts. And I believe that the few companies that will be able to best leverage the many dozens and maybe even hundreds of data sources to generate the best insights and operationalize them so that incidents and communication are automatically created will be some of the top companies and vendors in the industry in 5 or 7 years.
So you can do more than I can do with pulling down those tools and using grep, right? Is that the crux of it? That's what I went to when you talked about, I can get one tool that does this and one tool that does this and pull down some data. and you use some scripting to, I can only get so far doing that, right? I think you and I talked about this, Rob, right? Like I can't get to the next level where I can operationalize it.
Absolutely, and we are talking to and we've onboarded a bunch of Fortune 100 companies and others that have been building such solutions for years, by the way, based on these dozens of data sources and then a lot of scripting. But when we run a POC with them and show them their own attack surface, what we're seeing is we were able to see between 30 to 70% more assets. And even in the POC, we usually show them at least 5 or 10 ways to get into some networks and some applications data that in many cases they haven't even heard of. And obviously you cannot protect what you don't know. And by the way, that's a good question for us as an industry, right? How come we've got to the point where it's legitimate and makes sense to run vulnerability scanning, for example, on 30% of the network, or a pen test on 1% of the network, simply because it costs too much. So you, customer, will be fine, we hope, with us testing just these 5 applications, even though you have thousands of assets and thousands or hundreds of web applications. I mean,
yeah. And Rob, I would argue that there's still value in doing that for different reasons, and that you need attack surface management to know about all of those things so that you can deal with them, because it might be different, right? And pen testing still has its value, so does vulnerability scanning, right? But without an attack surface monitoring, like, you're in a significant disadvantage, in my opinion.
Of course, I'm talking about quite a different thing, actually. I'm talking about, we should run vulnerability scanning on 100% of the assets versus 30%, which is, for example, our approach and what we're doing with our customers. And 2, regarding pen testing, I think there is tremendous importance in the manual pen testing and reverse engineering, definitely. But that should be focused, these last mile pen testing, or the last 10% of the pen test that is the most difficult to do, should be focused on the areas that are the most vulnerable and exposed and attractive to attackers, versus being picked as a random project because I remember that we launched this new product last month, so that can be a target. And I was asked in the last board meeting about this other environment, so I'll also run a pen test over there, but not in the other 100 environments. And if I'll be asked as a CISO, for example, hey, how did you pick these targets? I will not have a great explanation. And that would not fly, I believe, like in insurance, right? You would not insure your living room just because that's the first room in the house that you see when you enter the house.
And I think that's it makes sense. When you do a pen test, I mean, it's expensive. You want them to focus on the stuff that matters the most. But I wanted to touch a little bit on like how you get from that 30 or 70%, in addition to the rest of the stuff there, because that's what I found really fascinating when we started to dig into this market. And when me and Paul were talking about what to do the product reviews on first, this market, like, we knew enough about it to be interested in it, but there were just so many companies there popping up, and we didn't really understand what they're doing. And I think everybody kind of views this market from what they know, and most people know Shodan or Census, which is basically a scan of the entire internet, and for a small fee, or maybe for free in a limited way, you can query their scan of the internet. And I think the biggest thing, that kind of shocked me, that I didn't realize was going on, was what I ended up calling seed discovery, because I don't know what else to call it. But this idea that what we're missing is the whole point. We're scanning the stuff we know about, but that's the whole problem, is this other 30 to 70% that we don't know about. So how do we find out about that? And first, running a tool like Cycognito, one of the first things you're presented with are domain names you've never heard of before. And you're like, oh, this must be a mistake. How did this end up in my results in this tool? And, it actually shows you, well, the way we found this is you gave us the name of a company, and we found these DNS names from that. And then we did some DNS brute forcing, and we found some subdomains of that. And then on the web page, on one of those subdomains, we scraped that web page and found another DNS name. And there's this string, and it basically reads like a pen test report, like how a pen tester will find their way from point A to point Z. And all of a sudden, you know about these domains that were registered 5 years ago. Somebody set up a proof of concept or something like that, completely forgot about it, abandoned it, and of course, that's where you're going to get popped because everyone's forgotten it exists.
Yep. Or we didn't know because, and several reasons we started with the domains that we thought we knew about, because under CRA, right, there's like 5 companies that were acquired in 18 months. And we're like, I bet you no one really knows exactly what we own. I'm like, right. Adrian, I did some cursory looks, and here's what I think. Yeah, here's what I think. Here's what I think we own. Like right? That, right? Here's what I think we've got. And Cycognito was, just one of the tools. And there were others as well, but Cycognito did a great job of like. Adrian's like, hey, do you know we have this? I'm like, nope, had no idea.
I think that's a great point that I'm glad you raised, and I was also glad, not surprised, but glad to read where you wrote that Cycognito found more unique and interesting findings than any other vendor, which I think is the exact quote. But yes, I think the way we see it, there are 2 other types of vendors out there. One that we call port scanners, solutions, tools like Shodan and Census that will literally show you a port scanning data or a little bit more than port scanning data on literal IP addresses that you're looking for. And so that is something that anyone can afford, but it doesn't scale in any way, and it does not solve the security blind spots problem by definition. Doesn't show you a single bit of information on anything that you're not already proactively searching for. And then there are quote unquote attack surface management companies where if they're not of the first type, then they have literally analysts searching for IP ranges that they believe that you might own, or they ask you for your input, which is like a managed Shodan service. Sometimes it has some more information than just port scanning, but that's the essence of it. And what we've learned from these own companies or various sources of information is that running a single POC in a full-blown mode takes between 4 to 6 weeks that way and costs them tens of thousands of dollars on human labor alone to run that POC. So that's a one point in time effort of attack surface mapping that is manual, is based on this Nmap data model where you simply have IP ranges that are tagged as yours, and it doesn't change over time. These IP ranges don't change over time. So the problem is that as new networks are being deployed, new cloud assets are being acquired, extended, and so on, and you acquire new companies, you divest companies.
Yeah. Now, let me stop you there real quick, because that's a great example. And that's a great way to talk about how this product is so different from. Because that was one section of the report was, how is this different from an external vulnerability scanner? And acquisitions is a great example. Like, you've got a tool here where you can initially tell it one and your company can acquire another company, and this tool will figure that out on its own. Like, how many tools do you have in your security portfolio that on their own figure out that you've acquired another company and start looking for issues in that acquired company?
Absolutely. And some of our customers, like Bertelsmann and Tesco and others, literally have hundreds of departments, subsidiaries, facilities all over the world. Great companies, by the way, and great security teams. So with a port scanner, it's not even painful to do it manually. It's impossible. Of course, especially in cybersecurity, and especially if you don't ask the business-oriented questions, you can do anything. You can scan 10 servers and feel like you're doing a good job, or scanning this one environment for compliance. Say you're compliant because you haven't scanned, or you're not protecting or monitoring or assessing the 100 other environments. But to your point, Adrian, which I think is an important one, a super important one, as a CISO or as a CEO, are you focused on protecting the company or checking these boxes? Because you can check all of these boxes easily by scanning even 100 assets. The vulnerability scanning point, the pen testing point, risk management point. You can use security ratings to feel that you have a good grasp of what your third parties are doing based on the number of open ports they have. But 9 out of 10 CISOs don't want to trust these sources for risk management. And by the way, that's also something that has changed in my perspective over the last few years alone.
So taking that point, I got a quick question around this. Definitely scales well, and this provides great visibility from a C-level and very large company in asset management. Does it also scale down? We see a huge risk in not just SMBs, but maybe high equity or companies that have a small footprint for users or staff, but have high volumes of monetary value. Does this scale down to those kind of clients as well?
Like a company of like 60 people that acquired a
that
bunch
might
of
be
companies.
us,
That might
which
be,
is what
might
we
be us.
did the testing.
Yeah, so actually,
yes,
that's a great point, Adrian. Adrian, if you want to share your thoughts with regard to what you've seen, feel free to. Or I'll just start by saying that we have customers that are even startups that don't have a security team, but must protect their data, their customers' data, right? And we had one of our customers, a security company, had, for example, many customers' security names exposed by subdomains, and they had no idea. And we had another big startup customer also in the security realm, where they had one of the top firewalls vendors being misconfigured in a way it was using a 25 years old encryption that can be literally disencrypted with a cell phone. So the answer is yes, although I will say that generally speaking, the attack surface protection challenge is becoming bigger exponentially as the attack surface is bigger and more complex. But it's true that for these SMBs and SMEs that have tiny security teams, they're definitely looking for automated solutions to these problems and not, scanners and tools they have to run manually and make all of the decisions by themselves.
Yeah, and Tyler, I'll give you an example of that too. I knew from speaking with people inside of our company that we were using certain technologies and SaaS providers, right? I could have gone and looked for those on my own without knowing that. Probably would have taken me quite some time. And then Adrian would show me the results. And he's like, do you know we had this? I'm like, yeah, I think I heard that like in a meeting somewhere, right? He's like, this is where we have it, how it's configured, and this is how it was discovered. So that was really cool.
Yeah, and I think another SME, a small company with, I think, 1,000, 2,000, well, relatively small company with 1,000 or 2,000 employees, had a partner in China that had this server that was exploitable, led to their network, and they didn't even know about that partner, for example. So that definitely happens in any and every scale.
Mm.
Yeah. And so just to, touch on some of the challenges that tools run into in this area is that when you're going down that rabbit hole and you're chasing those connections, between systems, you're eventually going to find some third-party systems. And one of the interesting things there is that you find out some of the things that those third parties are doing with your data that you might not have known about.
Yeah, that's interesting, Adrian. I think sometimes we found stuff that was a vulnerability or exposure in the third party that related to us that necessarily we couldn't control, right? Yeah,
we found several. And it's interesting because at first I'm like, oh, this tool would be better if it tuned this stuff out. And then like, wait a minute, like, no, that's actually something we'd want to know about and probably contact that third party and tell them to fix their stuff.
Yeah, and security teams are doing it. And it's actually another great point, because if you have this partner and he's putting you and your data at risk, for example, your marketing team is employing this other company to build you this website or this marketing campaign, and you have source code and API keys and other things exposed on these other companies' Git server that happens to be exposed to attackers and expose this sensitive information.
Rob, I think that was one of the biggest findings for me. Now that I think about it, really scary, because the amount of development websites, right? Like when like you said, you commission someone to build a web property for you, you tend to underestimate like how much infrastructure is built to do the dev and QA and testing in push to production, and you end up with 3 or 4 copies, of that website. And a lot of times, as Adrian and I discovered, they don't take that stuff down, right? Because they could still be actively working on or the worst case is they're not, and they just left it up and running.
They forgot about it.
Yeah, and the other question is, what is this third party measured by? They're not measured by how secure their dev environment or even that marketing campaign is.
Yeah.
And the other question is this company's security team proactively tests such environments, where the answer is pretty much always no.
Yep. Also makes me want to... In general,
I've got this theory that, and it's more than a theory. I actually recommend it as a metric for security programs to track the average age of assets that you have. Right. And generally, I think that the older that average age gets, maybe this is a bit ageist for assets. I don't know if assets care about that kind of thing, but generally the younger they are, the less vulnerable they are.
Right.
Like you run into DevOps teams that change passwords on systems like once an hour or something like that, and like they talk about not having an instance running in the cloud that's older than maybe a week or something like that. Like everything gets refreshed on a regular basis, not just for security. It helps security out a lot, but for performance also.
I was also going to say, age coupled with...
You don't have to worry about memory leaks if your instance doesn't run longer than X amount of hours.
Age coupled with frequency of use, too. Because, I mean, it's one thing to have an old asset out there. It's another thing to have an old asset that, like, if you look at the logs, it's not really being used. And I find that with, like, a lot of our domains specifically. I'm like, if I had looked at the frequency and usage of our domains in some way, or other kinds of cloud assets, the ones that aren't getting a lot of traffic probably aren't getting a lot of attention from IT or the dev teams either, which means it's ripe for the taking in a subdomain takeover, for example.
Absolutely. And we actually built modules to detect exactly these kind of cases, like assets that have really old SSL certificates, or the content seems to have been built 5, 10, 15 years ago and not updated since, or are using just a really old tech stack. And we create a security gap type for them that is called abandoned assets. So you can simply review these and potentially shut them down on the spot. Like we have these telecom customers that literally had a server in their internal network that was accidentally exposed to the internet, and it was there for 15 years. It was actually used as a coffee table in one of their offices. And no one had the guts to disconnect the damn thing from the network. But that was the path of least resistance into their network, for example.
I totally, if I worked there, would have spilled coffee on it by now.
Accidentally.
Yeah, accidentally.
That's another type of security.
That's right. That's funny, though, because we hear the old fables of servers being built into walls in universities. That's the first time I heard the coffee table.
That's funny.
It's awesome. Now everyone's thinking about infrastructure they may have forgotten about, right? That's usually when we conclude this. You're like,
I'm just thinking about building a computer into my coffee table.
a coffee table, right?
See, I went the other way with that.
Yeah. I want to
As soon as
SSH
you
in a
do
Larry's
that
coffee
discussion-
table. Yeah.
As soon as we went through that discussion, I just
self-warming
SSH'd
coffee
around.
Yeah, and Adrian, I would love to also hear your thoughts. One question from me after doing these 10 reviews or so with respect to security grading and prioritization, and how do you operationalize this? So what are some of your learnings from that reviews you did?
Everyone gets an F.
Yeah, no. We specifically did not give letter grades to companies here, but I think you're talking about like within the vulnerability risk program, right?
Right.
In that context.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, how do I find can you find using this solution the top 10 risks that are meaningful?
So you said at the beginning here, and I think it's important enough to call out again, that this should be feeding into other tools. I could definitely see these tools replacing external vulnerability scanning at some point. But still at this point, there are things that those scanners are going to find that you guys aren't going to find, and you're obviously finding stuff that they're not. So for, in the meantime, they absolutely should be feeding into one another. And, I think, increasingly as we go forward, we're going to see, products like, Kenna, and, we just saw Brinkwell raise some money recently. There's going to be these systems that all the risk and vulnerability stuff kind of feed into in one place, so that you can kind of get that overall view of, okay, what should I be worried about? And, with products like these, 100% of it is externally accessible. So already you've got that important context there. This is stuff exposed to the public internet. So already all of it gets that big, plus jump in criticality, because anybody can reach out and touch it, mess with it, hack it, whatever.
I think for me, Rob, and Adrian and I had this awesome discussion about okay, if we were in charge of the company's security and we're the CISO or lead security team, what would we do to assess the perimeter and the attack surface? And I'm like, I don't think I'd use vuln scanners for that anymore. I just wouldn't. I would use attack surface management and monitoring tools, and that would get me almost all the way there, and I'd operationalize that. And then, the other stuff we know about and that you can secure in different ways. My vuln scanning program would just use agents because I know about that stuff and I control it, right? My web apps that I develop, I'm going to secure in a totally different way in my SDLC, and there's many points that you can do that. I'm like, from the outside in, I'm like, this is the tool that I would use.
Yeah, and that's also where, to your end, to Adrian's points, that's where consolidation comes into place, because if you're using an ASM solution, a high quality ASM solution, and a vulnerability scanner that costs $3 to $10 per IP per year for the external attack surface, and then you also want to use a Kenna-like solution, you end up paying between $1 and $1.5 million, sometimes even more, in an enterprise. And not many companies are willing to pay that. And that's why consolidating these capabilities, which also creates many other efficiencies, I believe is what's going to happen, because it's just so inefficient to use this scanner here, this data source there, this other solution that simply can integrate a few things and add some threat intelligence to it. That's not efficient. You can think of Salesforce as a combination of 20 different tools. Yeah. And when it is the case, Salesforce builds that or expands into that area.
Yeah, because for me, it's not so much about the vulnerabilities. It's about the fact that it exists. That's more important to me, because typically if it's exposed and discoverable out there on the internet, it's something I need to secure. And the fact that it has vulnerabilities or not, obviously, if you can find vulnerabilities in them, that's going to help with the priority. But to me, that's not the goal. The goal is defining it and discovering it.
Right, absolutely. And there are many risks, by the way, that vulnerability scanners simply cannot find, like data exposure, web application security gaps, where these DAST scanners are not scalable for many reasons. So yeah, these are things, some tactical yet super important gaps that you really need to know the space to understand why that's reality. So when you look at a data set of this kind of product, you realize that, okay, these guys can help me solve this problem. But it's hard for many to build that architecture in their mind to completely solve this problem and not end up depending on dozens of different tools and data sources.
Rob,
Some people might argue that they could find them, but there's no corresponding CV, so they just don't care.
yeah, that's certainly a thing. It's not all about the CVEs, right? Rob, I just have 5 questions for you. Are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Sure. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'll try.
Well, there's no right or wrong
answer,
answer,
yes.
so yeah, you'll be fine. Rob, 3 words to describe yourself.
Wow.
That's one.
It's a good one.
Builder, curiosity-oriented person, and I guess a hacker.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Vulnerability scanners, just because they're so painful.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Poacher becomes gatekeeper.
What's your favorite hacker movie?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have any. I was quite disappointed from the few that I saw. But funnily enough, there was one, what's it called? There was an episode on South Park about web intelligence that was really funny. I don't
that's
remember
awesome.
what
I'm going to have to
episode
go
it
look
was.
that one up. That's awesome.
That's a good answer.
Yeah, I like
It is
that.
a good answer.
We'll take it.
Rob, choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fiction,
Alive,
or
dead,
otherwise.
fictional or otherwise.
Wow. I have no idea. For this one, I literally have no answer.
They can be silly celebrities.
Maybe, I don't know. I have no idea. That one is a tough.
I don't know as an answer. Like I said, there's no right or wrong answer. So,
yeah,
Rob,
absolutely.
thank you very much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly.
Yeah, it was awesome, and look forward to the next time.
Me too. For folks that want to learn more, you can visit securityweekly.com/Cycognito to learn all about attack surface management. Up next is the security news. Stay tuned.